Hi guys. Just been out and about today quite a bit, so I'm roasting. It's lovely weather here and getting my steps in. Have that cut that I need to do, so want to get that done. And I'm just going to do more in the overlap series of autism. And today we're looking at one that commonly gets mistaken for autism, and that's schizoid personality disorder. So it's a condition that I would define as almost the opposite of borderline in many ways, in that it's not emotional like what you'd expect with borderline. And I've got it's not just me, like there's very few people who have a full understanding of it, because when you meet someone who has it, the reason it overlaps with autism so much is because very flat affect, you know. I even heard someone describe it as, say, if you hear news like of opposite ends of the spectrum. So, like on one hand, it's like your grandmother's died, and the other hand, you've won the lottery. You'll get a similar, very flat response of, "Okay, there's just nothing here," and it's just very flat. The expressions are non-existent. So you're not going to get someone who's very emotional and over the top with love and empathy. Don't expect that, and I guess that's how it can come across as autism. There's also, from what I gather, and I'm not a psychiatrist, but there isn't much interest in anything really. It's a very isolated condition where you literally just keep to yourself. You've limited hobbies and you've no desire really for a connection. Um, from what I gather, I guess you have to speak to people who have the condition, and also because people with this don't present very often because they don't feel like there's anything to present, it can go undiagnosed for a while. Um, I guess because people just see it as, well, like my own company, I don't see the need to interact with loads of different people, so leave me be. And I mean, there's a fair argument for that. It's like, well, don't I don't want to bother anyone, so don't bother me. That kind of thing. And yeah, like that's pretty fair. I think if they don't mind being on their own and they're happy just going to their work and doing what they want, and they lead a really uneventful life, leave them off. If that's what they want. God knows there's enough shit in life to cause you stress and trauma, so leave them off if that's the way they want to be. Um, and I saw an interesting documentary where they were talking about the dark history of autism, and basically the man who Asperger's is named at, like it's named after a man called Hans Asperger's, and he was an Austrian physician. It seemed like quite a terrible human being. Basically, like whoever was deemed useful to the Reich back in Nazi times was used. They were brought forward. Usually, like people with autism can contribute quite a lot to science and very theoretical thinkers, and I would be as well. I'm trying to get back to that now, my old self, but I would say that I'd be quite a theoretical thinker. Yeah. Um, but he basically sent those who were deemed undesirable to be killed, under the Nazi regime, which is quite dark. But there was also research done into links with autism and schizophrenia. So obviously, schizophrenia would be hallucinations, like hearing things that aren't there, seeing things that aren't there, and even feeling things that aren't there, which sounds horrific. Tactile hallucinations, they're called. And then also you have delusions. Like I think the government are out to get me, or lizard people are after me, or whatever it might be. The CIA, for instance. So that's a serious condition. But I guess the flat affect is something as well that you get with schizophrenia, and people hear schizoid and they think, oh, you're a schizoid. Someone with schizophrenia is a schizoid, but that's not what it is. There is a link though. Um, so there's three clusters of personality disorders: cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. We usually only hear about the cluster B because, unfortunately, he who shouts the loudest wins. And people from the cluster B are typically the erratic, the dramatic, and the loud and obnoxious kind. It's not to say they're not going through a lot, but they're the loudest in the room. Whereas people in cluster A and cluster C typically don't present with symptoms because you have quite a introverted bunch in group A, and then in group C, the anxious and discouraged group, so they're not really presented for treatment as much. I talked about avoidant personality disorder, and that's in cluster C. So we're getting to cluster A now, which would be all these conditions seem like there's an overlap with schizophrenia. Like you have schizoid, which is flat, very dull persona. You're not beaming with emotion. And I think I discussed that pretty well just there to give you an idea. You've got schizotypal, which would be like odd or eccentric behavior. Um, that's quite a confusing one, I have to say. It's believed Jeffrey Dahmer had that and borderline personality disorder. So um, schizotypal would be odd obsessions. So Jeffrey Dahmer had an odd obsession with human organs. He used to bleach animal bones and did taxidermy and all that. He an unhealthy obsession with bones and obviously human body parts, as we found out later, which is quite disturbing. And then you've paranoid personality disorder. So I think what comes to mind with that is paranoid schizophrenia. And it's quite tricky to actually decipher the difference between the two because you're there thinking the person is paranoid and believes something that's not true. People are able to get them, they're paranoid for no reason. But then you're kind of like, well, what's the difference with that and paranoid schizophrenia? Because that seems to be the same thing. But I think with the paranoid personality disorder, you're not getting the hallucinations, but you're delusional in your thinking. Is that you think everybody is out to get you? You read into things that people say, and it sounds quite horrible and anxiety riddling to deal with that. Doesn't sound very pleasant, to be honest. But we're getting to schizoid, and with that, it's quite dull, quite flat affect. No real desire for relationships. But I've watched a few people with it, and I don't think that's true from listening to them. They seem to have a desire to connect with people, but they don't have the tools to do it. And I'd say that that'd be the same with autism in many ways. Like I've always wanted a relationship. I've never wanted a one night stand or anything. Um, I've always desired a relationship, but just hasn't been very forthcoming. So we're going to get into it now, and I'm going to share my screen with you as I always do. And I love a good Venn diagram. Here we are now. Pop myself up. Yeah, so that's what I was talking about right there, the overlap. But we'll show you now. So you've got with autism, we've discussed that quite a bit because that's my condition. It's my favorite. It's one that I can speak to confidently. But you have the sensory issues, the bright lights, the loud noises, the horrible sensations of food and clothing. Then you have repetitive behaviors and rituals, maybe hand tapping, stimming that I talked about before, also echolalia. One bit of echolalia that I keep having. Did anybody see that James Brown interview? Single, ready to mingle. I look good. I feel good. Smell good. I make love good. I can't stop doing that laugh, where he's sitting there and he just goes, Joe Rogan and Joey Diaz were looking at it and they just start pissing themselves laughing, and I can't stop making that noise. There we are. There's a bit of echolalia for you. Visual high context thinker, that's another one. And a way I would describe that, because high context would be reading into things that are reading into every situation. So if someone does something monotonous, I'll be going, oh, what do they mean by that? Or what are they trying to get at there? like there's a meaning behind everything everyone does. You know what I mean? Can't really explain it any other way than that. But if someone says a throwaway comment, I'd be like, "Oh, were they trying to insult me there? Or were they trying to be smart or piss me off? You know, what did they mean by that?" I'm always reading into things that there might not be anything there, but I'm always like, "Oh, what did they mean by that?" You know, and it's quite hard to decipher from when someone's just saying something out of context or whether they're genuinely trying to take the piss out of you. And it can be quite difficult to deal with at times, let me tell you. Strict adherence to routines and structure doesn't really apply to me. I've always had quite a scattered brain, and my routine has changed whether I liked it or not. So I had to kind of deal with it, you know. Yeah, it wasn't really up to me. So just had to put up and shut up and get used to it, which I have, but that's made me quite disorganized, unfortunately. Special interests. Ooh. And yeah, like, I mean, special interests would be, fascinations. Like I said before, I used to be obsessed with killer whales. I used to just love them, and I was obsessed with them. Another one was werewolves. When I was younger, then I developed things like sport. You know, I used to have little toy wrestlers, WWE wrestlers, and I'd get the little rugby ball from a key ring, and I'd play rugby with them, and I'd get my mega blocks and make goalposts. And it's pretty fun, actually. It was really fun. And I had hours of entertainment doing that. And then we get over to schizoid and self isolation. So there's not really a deep desire to connect, or if there is, there's no ability really to connect with others, you know? From my understanding, if anyone knows any more about this condition, plop it in below because people are always learning, you know, and just because someone doesn't always cry the loudest doesn't mean they're not suffering. Might be suffering on the inside, especially if they're self isolating. We have detached and indifferent to relationship. So it's like, I'm fine if you're here, but I'm fine if you're not. I don't really need a relationship, but I don't know if I buy that 100% kind of thing. Like, you need relationships, but you just don't have the ability to develop them and put enough effort into them because it's a two-way street, you know. So you have to put in effort. You have to give what you get, basically. Um, Someone might expect, say, in a romantic relationship, someone might expect a certain level of passion and love, and they're not giving anything back. So the person might take that to heart and go, "Well, you obviously don't love me then," and maybe that's not the case. Would be what I would think from that. Validation comes from within, not external. So seems like there's not really much of a care of what people think. I don't need you to tell me I'm great, you know, and it's not necessarily narcissism or anything. It's more so I'm indifferent to your praise. You know what I mean? The same way with relationships. So if someone says, "I love you," okay, remember what I was saying? Flat affect, this one right here. So that might be quite relaxing actually to have the validation within and to think, to not be basically change the way you see yourself based on what others see. If that makes sense, I hope it does. Restricted range of emotion. So you're not going to get someone who is extremely, outgoing and extroverted. Don't expect extroversion with this condition. Either of these two, I would say, to be quite a high level of introversion. You're not going to get someone who's very outgoing, and you might not even notice them, put it that way. Yeah, I know everybody's different, but I would say typically don't expect to see a very outgoing person if you've got either of these two conditions, and if you've got both, because both of them can exist um, together. You know, they can be comorbid with each other. Difficulty with empathy, and I don't think that's necessarily a lack of care. I just think it's because of a restricted range of emotion, like we were talking about. So that impacts this. So someone might be crying and again saying, "Oh my God, I'm so upset. My grandmother died. My dog got hit by a car," and they might seem like they don't care. It's like, okay, that's like, what do you mean, okay? People expect a certain response, and it might not be that they don't care. And like I talked about with autism, um, I always have had empathy. I just didn't know what the appropriate way to express it was. Either I would show too much, and then people would be like, "Oh my God, okay, you can relax now." So I was like, "Oh, so do people want me to show none?" I don't know. It's kind of like, well, what the hell do you want? How much validation is enough, and then how much is too much? I don't know. But if you have a restricted range of emotion and you are quite flat and unresponsive to any external stimuli, I imagine it's very difficult for you to be like, "Oh my God, are you okay? I'm so sorry." You might give a shit. You just can't really show it in a socially acceptable way, if that makes sense. Social anhedonia. So we talked about anhedonia before with depression, but it's not getting pleasure from things. So they're not getting pleasure from interacting with people. Like some people, it brings them joy when they interact with others. And I mean, for me, it does as well. Like you're excited to meet a group of your friends. They don't really get this. Sometimes I get it. A lot of times I don't, and I feel like, oh, I should be doing it because you need friends. And look, I do get joy from seeing people as well, but not always. And sometimes it's exhausting interacting with certain people, and I'd rather just be on my own. There's less drama, but at the same time, I can get very anxious about seeing people, and I can want to see them, but just be so overwhelmed that it feels easier to stick to myself and not bother going out with anybody, if that makes sense. And then there's another element of it as well where everybody else is doing it. So there's something wrong with me for not wanting to do it. And I wouldn't have had as much of a desire to connect with people. Then I could see how much it was upsetting my parents that I wasn't doing it. And the social norm is that I socialize and make an effort, make friends. And when I got social media, I was constantly comparing myself to other people and being like, oh, I need to be doing this. This is how I should be behaving. You think, oh my God, I'm such a loser. How do I not know to do this? Or, I need to play catch up here. I need to make more friends. I'm pathetic. I need to up my game here. But there would be a lot of times where I wouldn't get much pleasure from being out in a group. I prefer to be in my own. And I guess that all depends on who you're with as well. Both of these conditions can have a small friend group, and that's fine. That's enough. But it's not down to lack of desire. I just found it at times too difficult to connect with people and exhausting, like really exhausting. So when you get to the overlap and flat affect, we've talked about already. So with both conditions, like when I was younger, I would have had quite a flat affect. So people in the shop would try and talk to me and be real open and expressive, and I'd be like, "Yeah, hi," and I wouldn't want to. I was down to just pure awkwardness and anxiety. It was like I just want to get what I need and get the hell out of here. I don't want anyone trying to make small talk with me. It's too difficult. Here, I think you've got a restricted range of emotions that would explain flat affect. I think you're not getting someone who's beaming with excitement ever, really. Social difficulties and withdrawal. Yeah, I mean, self explanatory, isn't it? But if you don't really get much from social interactions or they're too difficult, it can be very easy to withdraw, especially if you're very anxious and thinking, what do I say? What do I do here? There's too much going on up here. I can't focus. I can't think. This is exhausting. I certainly would empathise with that difficulty with eye contact. When I get very nervous, my eyes would drift and I wouldn't be able to focus on someone. And I remember before, this is not that long ago. just walking with a friend and seeing a lad that I played rugby with, and I was in school with him as well. And he said hello to me. And I was like, "Oh, hello, Kev. How are you?" and whatever. But he brought up how awkward it was when we were up training together, and I was like, "Oh, it's not you. It's my autism." And I just find it difficult sometimes, depending on how I am. What mood I'm in. As I say, I can get very anxious in everyday life, and even in situations that I've done them 1,000 times, like the shopping. I will always get quite anxious before that, and I just want to leave. I don't enjoy doing it, but I know it needs to be done. And I guess the more you do it, the more capable you are. And if I didn't try it, I wouldn't be able for it now. I'm able to do it. It's just, it takes energy out of me. So I can do it, but it does take energy out of me. And like making eye contact with people in the shop, trying to be personable and, outgoing. Sometimes I'd be like looking all over the place. I find it difficult. And that can also lead into the social withdrawal because it's just exhausting dealing with people. Motivation difficulties. Definitely, yeah. It's one that really pisses me off. I talked about indifference and autism, and motivation is something that I just find very hard to have. I find it very hard to look passionate about things. So flat affect, people will ask me, "Oh, are you excited? Are you raring to go?" And I'll be like, yeah, okay, yeah." And you can look like you're ungrateful. You can look like you are just lazy, but it's just that like you cannot summon that motivation. It's just not there. And I think it's easy for people who are like that to get abused because if you have someone who knows exactly what they want and they're willing to step all over everybody to get it, then they're very sure of themselves. They know what they want and they're dead set on their goal and they will do whatever it takes to get there. Whereas you get people like this who are quite passive and don't really know what they want, find it hard to set goals. They can be very impressionable. Like I was very impressionable because I thought, oh, I better try this and that, and everybody else knows best, and I know nothing because I have motivation difficulties. I'm just lazy. Everybody else is so much better than me, which is not the case. But I struggle to just sum up the motivation. So I can definitely relate to this one, and it pisses me off. It's like before rugby games, I would be delighted when they'd be called off. Everybody else would be like, "Oh, it was raring to go, and I really enjoyed that." I did a great job of pretending to care, but many times just could not have given a fuck. I was like, once this is over, I'll be so relieved. But everybody praised me for playing, and I did enjoy it at times, but there were times I just wanted the game to be over as well. Yeah, it just really took it out of me, trying to socialize with everybody, trying to give pep talks, be like, "Let's go, team, let's go," and all this stuff. People who are very, and it just gets us into the next topic nicely. So I think I'll just discuss that first. Easily overwhelmed with positive emotions from other people. And that would be like lads who would say, be very much, "Let's go, let's smash these fuckers, let's do this, and I'd be like, "Yeah, yeah, okay." And I didn't know what I was going to be like in the game. I preferred to just do the game, get that done. Um, Actions speak louder than words. Let my actions take over. And to be fair, they usually did quite well. I was never very good at mouthing off. I had difficulty doing that. I couldn't come up with the quick slags. Say if someone said something or would cheap shot me in a game, I would just point and go, "Right, I'm getting you. You're dead now." And they'd be kind of going, "Oh yeah, what are you gonna do?" Well, let me tell you, I can hold a grudge, and I did. I just dropping an elbow into them or sometimes kneeing them in the balls. I was better with my actions than my words, which I think is a good thing. A lot of people are all talk. actions are definitely better. And usually my actions were quite good, I will say. But I did get overwhelmed, with people who were very outgoing and extroverted. I used to be like, oh my God, they're so chatty and loud. And ironically, I've adopted that, like I'll chat to anyone now and people will probably think I'm very extroverted, which I can be, but it does take it out of me, which is why you need a high need for a long time. um, just and there was this lad called Jacob on the channel that I love, Soft White Underbelly, run by Mark Lieta. But Jacob was autistic, and he said something I really liked. Check out his channel if you haven't. Really great guy. Does pottery and just says it's hard for me to people sometimes. I just can't people very well today. And I was like, yes, that's exactly it. Just dealing with people's bullshit, and feeling like you should be passionate and you should have all these unwritten rules of life. Boundaries would kind of be it, which you should have, but you kind of don't really know your own mind. You don't have all these unwritten social rules that everybody else has, and it can be quite exhausting to deal with it because you can set people off and be like, what the fuck did I do this time? And I think in particular now people have so many things like little issues that set them off and a need to be offended. Everybody's so fucking easily offended right now, like everybody's offended. And it feels like they're waiting for you to say something that they can get pissed off with. And if they read into a situation, it will always be a negative way. They will always read into a situation negatively and think you're trying to put them down or say something to them. And plus, because they're so stupid and unintelligent, they don't know what you're talking about. So they assume you're trying to put them down. And I've dealt with that many times and it can be fucking exhausting to deal with. And if you work with people like that, you want to keep the peace. You don't want to be fighting with people you work with. And I found like if I'd argue with someone in work, even though I was just standing my own ground, I was like, fuck me, they're exhausting. I need my own time now. I need to go home and sleep for Ireland because that was exhausting and it would just weigh on me so much. It's very difficult to people, as Jacob would put it. I thought you did a great job. Really good interview. I love Soft White Underbelly. Some of the people he gets on, it's just great to hear their story. A lot of people struggling, and it's nice to know you're not alone, but it's also nice that they can express themselves and realize they're not alone as well. Genetic and neurological similarities. So I was talking about Hans Asperger and autism and schizoid personality disorder certainly have a lot of overlap and a lot of similarities. Like you could have quite simple answers, you're expecting more from a conversation. I think particularly being Irish has probably helped me to develop my bullshittery in conversation, which I call it. But in Ireland, like we very much ask a question expecting more than just what we've asked for. We are masters at shy talking, whereas German people will be more. And I know this because I experienced it. Like, say, if you ask an Irish person, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Ballantyre in Dublin, or I'm from Ballygarrett in Wexford, and my family have lived here for generations. And you know my granddad, and they'll start coming up with a whole host of conversations from one question. Whereas you ask a German person, and I literally got Dusseldorf, and then turned away. Dusseldorf, gone. You asked a question, I gave the answer. That's probably why I don't mind Germans as much because that was me when I was younger. But then growing up in Ireland, you've got to learn to adapt or die. You can't be Irish and not learn the art of bullshittery. So yeah, don't expect a lot of highfalutin answers. And I think people will assume you're rude just because you give one word responses or like when I couldn't people. And I was struggling. Even my own family, like when I got home from work, I just did not want to talk. I was exhausted. I needed to sit on the couch and vegetate. They'd asked me, "Oh, how'd work go?" I was like, It was all right." I was like, "What's wrong with you?" I was like, I don't want to talk. I'm just not in the mood for it." People are uncomfortable with that. People don't like it when you just want to be left alone and not bothered. It's ironic that people will give out and say, "Oh, why are you bothering me?" Or, "You're very chatty today." But they'll also give out and say, "What's the problem with you? You're very quiet." That used to be said to me all the time as a kid. And now I've gotten older and I can talk to people and I never stop. I can be very outgoing now. But as a kid, I would have been quite isolated and kept to myself. Wouldn't have said a whole lot to anyone, but just through trial and error and working on myself, I can talk to anyone about anything. And you can't stop me once I get started. So no, I definitely empathize 100%. This one as well, really, I can relate to this. Often feels more like an observer than a participant. It's like you're on the outside looking in all the time. Everybody else has their way of living. They have their rules, they have their personality, they have their way of being, and you're observing it, but you don't really know where you fall in that. Who am I? What do I stand for? What are my do's and don'ts, if you like? I don't really know. It's something I've only recently started considering. Who am I, and what am I? What am I? Human beings are tricky creatures, and some people will have their thing. So, like, you might have a family of carpenters, and that's their thing, or a family of fighters. Everybody in the family is really good at fighting. You might have a family of people in the army. The army is their thing. I don't really know what my thing is, if I'm being completely honest. I guess rugby would be what a lot of people would say, but sometimes that can be something I want to stay away from because it's just too much at times. But I know all about it, and I was pretty good at it, so yeah, it would be my thing, I guess. But I've described myself many times as a jack of all trades and a master of none because I've given so many different things a go and made a fool of myself doing it, which is good. You should do that, but at the same time, there's a lot of people who know what they're good at, and that's what they stick to. They know that's their thing, and I know this. I'm good at it. I don't even bother getting involved in other fields where I'm not good at. Um, I mean, farming. Speaking of fields, that's another one. Farmers that, like, you ask a farmer about what's the best way to treat your soil and to keep it well, and they'll go, "Oh, well, no, you go and you put seaweed on it." Seaweed is great. Like a farmer around here will tell you the best fertilizer and the best silage. They can tell you so much. And if you plant something about, "Oh, you don't plant that this time of the year," and they're brainiacs, they just know the land so well. And if you talk to an Irish farmer, they'll go off on a tangent until you bring them back. But they're full of knowledge, so definitely hit them up. They know what they're talking about. But that's what I would say for observers. Like, someone has their thing. I don't know what my thing is. That can be quite a shitty place to be in because you're like, oh, I don't know where I fit in, what I'm good at. Because some people are just excellent. They can repair stuff, they can fix stuff. So that's what they do. Other people are very good at maths and science, and they just stick to that. They don't bother trying to do anything else because they'll look like a fool doing it. I hope that makes sense. Ironically, like, we had this lecturer that I didn't really like him, and then I spoke to him one on one, and maybe he was scared of me. I don't know, but he was a lot more pleasant to deal with anyway. But he was a genius in the theoretical stuff. But he asked me how to work one of the machines. It was a UV vis spectrometer, and he couldn't work it. You're kind of like, you're a chemistry lecturer. Surely you should be able to work it. Work it, girl. Sure, that joke would have went way over his head, but I knew how to work it. I knew how to pop the machine open. I knew how to place the samples in. Um, yeah, he just didn't seem to have a clue how to work any of the machinery. And actually, another lecturer, a genetics lecturer, she nearly broke the Eppendorf tubes. You know, your centrifusion as well. She was terrible at doing that. You're like, you're a genetics lecturer. Surely you should know how to do this. But I was there doing it, and I was vortexing. I love genetics. I love biology in general. Chemistry is great as well, but um, just a lot of bad lecturers, I would say. Um, some that I liked, but I guess there was just a bit of a personality clash when it came to chemistry and the lecturers that did it. But anyway, that's about being an observer more so than a participant. Just going to pause this for a sec, guys. Back. Yeah, so just to touch on, yeah, just going over higher likelihood of being asexual or aromantic, and we touched on that before with the lexithymia, and we're talking about that video. So when you have all of the above, and flat affect, difficulty with socializing, feeling like an observer more than a participant, kind of looking at everybody else and thinking, oh, they have it all together. They're doers. I'm kind of an observer. I watch, how is this going to unfold? They have their way of doing things, and I don't really know what my way is. Because everything I seem to do is wrong. And like even touching on different jobs I had, so I think it's important to just go back to this one for a second because everything affects each other, and I would always go into jobs and people had their clicks, they had their ways of doing things, they knew how things ran, even if they weren't done correctly. Everybody was kind of on the same page. So I was wrong, even though I wasn't technically wrong, but they were doing things the way they had all agreed on it, and then I was kind of the odd one out for not knowing their lingo. And so, like, we used to have a big bucket for chips in a chipper that I worked in. For me, you don't put chips in a bin unless they're bad. But they would ask for it. Like one of the fellas in there was Portuguese, and he would ask for like he asked for a new bin. So I was like, okay, change the bin. Surely. But he was laughing and kind of going, oh, you took your time. What happened? I was like, I was getting you a bin bag. You wanted a new bin. No, no, for the chips. And I was like, you said bin. Surely chips don't go in the bin unless they're bad. We don't serve people chips from a fucking bin. But I was the odd one out because they knew what they were talking about and I didn't. But nobody told me that. Um, yeah, like every job I've been in, I feel like people know what they're at and I don't. And my dad didn't have much patience to train me in anything. So when I would go into construction sites, I would have no knowledge of electrics other than what I picked up when I was actually on the job because my dad just never had the patience to show me. He was like, you'll be grand, just ask someone. Don't bother me, I don't care, but bother someone else because I don't give a shit. That was the real attitude of don't annoy me, ask somebody else. I was like, oh, for fuck's sake, all right, I will. My parents never really taught me much. My mom certain things, but she has special ways of doing things that everybody else says, why do you do it this way? And she would be like, my way is always the right way. And I kind of be like, yes, ma'am, in our house it is, but everywhere else I get told, no, that's wrong. It was like, the way I made scrambled egg, and I'm going to back my mum up on this because the way she makes it is fucking amazing. She cooks it with oil and she puts spices in it, and it's delicious. The way other people make it is with milk and in the microwave. She makes it in the pan with oil. So I made it the way she showed me. People just said to me in the kitchen that I worked in, make me some scrambled egg. They wanted to observe what I was going to do. And then they were like, no, 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 this is how you make it. And I looked at them and I went, ugh, that's not how you make scrambled egg. Because my mammy doesn't do it that way, the Irish mammy. But I would say that's why I always feel like an observer. Everybody seems to agree on a way of doing something. And even if I don't agree, I'm always on my own, you know. And if I call it out, everybody else kind of goes with the flow. Whereas I'd be like, no, that's wrong. But then I look out of place. And it's very frustrating when you know you're not wrong, but everybody else tells you you're wrong because they all agree on a certain way of doing something. And they kind of put you down and act like you're the one who's in the wrong. Do you know what I mean? It's very fucking annoying, let me tell you. But then, with all that being said, the higher likelihood of being asexual or aromantic, and we come back to alexithymia that I was talking about. It's just a lack of emotions and sexual prowess. Now I have to also speculate, I have to stipulate for the record. I'll just say that I've been on and off antidepressants since I was 15, which wreaked fucking havoc with my sex drive. Absolutely destroyed it. So I've gotten it back since I quit them. I'm happy to say. I won't give you too many details, but I was just like a zombie, and I talked about it before, but I went over 3 months as a 19-year-old without ejaculating. And I'm saying this in a scientific way. I'm not saying this in a, you know, behave, act your age. These videos aren't made for kids, so let's all be adults here. But I always remember wanting an actual relationship, a romantic one. I always had this, it's going to sound kind of cringy, but I had this really, Beauty and the Beast type of idea in my head of like a fairy tale idea of relationships. Don't ever say that in an all boys school. I haven't. I never did, thank God. But imagine if I brought that up in an all boys school around lads, or, even just around your male friends and even my dad. You have to sound like you just want to get as many shags as possible, get your body count up. I never did, but God forbid I said that. You know, I didn't have the desire for it all the time, and also I didn't see the point. It's like I need a mental connection. You know, I didn't just want to ride everything that moved and that was it. Didn't appeal to me. It never appealed to me. Having sex, yeah, that appealed to me when I wasn't on antidepressants, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors that absolutely fuck with your reproductive organs. But I did, like, you do want sex, but you want it with the right person, which I don't think is actually that unusual. I think it's unusual the way people carry on nowadays, just riding everything that moves. But that's not my style. That's never been my style. But yeah, apparently that's abnormal. Yeah, I can imagine if you have difficulty with all these, like empathy, because you've flat, restricted emotions, you isolate, and you would be the most confident either, I imagine. So I can see it from a woman's point of view completely. Look, you want a man who you know will protect you if push comes to shove, and be spontaneous. Look, I get it, 100%. I get it. And I had to do a lot of work on myself. I wasn't ready to date. But personally, I don't think a lot of people are. They do it anyway, and they love to make drama. And this would be something I would agree with right now. I don't have the time or the energy to deal with all people's bullshit when it comes to relationships. I just want a nice, easy relationship. I don't need drama. He cheated on her, she cheated on him, blah, 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 blah. Fuck off. I don't care. Well, that's a lie. Sometimes I get drawn in. I actually started watching Love Island and caring about what was going on, and I was like, "Oh my god, I have to stop this now." Will Molly May go out with Tommy, and will Amber go out? I was like, "No, stop, stop! You've got to stop this now, Dan. You're not allowed. I'm cutting you off." But for me, I want the romantic partner that I have a connection with. I don't just want someone who I can blow my load into. That's it. You put it very romantically, didn't I? But what's the point? Genuinely, what's the point? Um, I don't see the point at all. When you have rigid cognitive patterns, um, so like routine, let's say this will come under routine again. And to be honest, like I saw someone before with autism who was very much regimented in their ways, and I thought, how boring. And I'm looking at that as an autistic person. I'm thinking, my heart kind of goes out to the guy, but it looks like a very miserable existence, and I just didn't like the way he was. I thought if I end up like that, I would be miserable. Same thing every day without fail. No real expression, no emotions. And I was like that. I felt like it was up to me to change that because who would want to go out with that? That's what I thought of myself. It was like, who would want to date me? I don't have any real passion or I'm very flat in my affect. The only emotion I really had was anger and sadness, which is not great. Explosive temper on one end, but crying and being miserable on the other. Always seeing the negative and everything, which I did quite a bit. I've got to change that, so that's why I worked so hard on myself. I think everybody has they owe it to not just themselves, but to a romantic partner to change it if you want one anyway. If you don't, fair enough. Or if you find someone who accepts you for the way you are, by all means. But for me, I could understand why someone wouldn't want to be with how I was before my older self because it was quite flat. It was quite dull. Not a lot of passion, not a lot of spontaneity. So I would get that. But yeah, look, I think that's an interesting overlap. Just because someone's not coming in screaming, I need help, help me now, I'm going to end it all. It doesn't mean they don't need help and that they're not suffering on the inside. I had to have all those explosive episodes to get any sort of help. And even at that, I'm getting very limited help, but I'm getting something at least. So do not despair, guys. Help is out there for those who need it, for those who deserve it, as Dumbledore would say. I think we'll wrap it up there. I hope you've enjoyed it, guys, and let me know what you think down below. And if you've any more to add, I'd love to hear it. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.